The Drakthul Dominion had ruled over 100 worlds. Their queen, Zalvarin, sat on her throne, watching as her generals reported their victories. One after another, alien species had fallen before their armies. But today, the report was different. "Your Majesty," said General Korak, kneeling before her, "the humans, they are still resisting." The queen narrowed her golden reptilian eyes. "Still," she repeated, her voice smooth but sharp. "That colony should have fallen weeks ago." "It should have," Korak admitted, glancing nervously at the other commanders. "But there is a problem." Zalvarin leaned forward, resting her clawed fingers against her throne. "Explain." "A warrior without equal." The general hesitated before continuing. "They have a leader, a human warrior. No one knows his name, but he moves through the battlefield like a shadow. He destroys supply lines, sabotages weapons, and strikes before vanishing into the ruins. The soldiers call him." He hesitated. "Speak," the queen commanded. "They call him the Ghost." Laughter erupted in the grand throne room. The queen's advisors scoffed, and even Zalvarin let out a soft chuckle. "A ghost," she mocked. "Are we afraid of bedtime stories now?" But Korak did not laugh. "He is real, my queen. He killed war leader Draxar 2 nights ago, the best tracker in our ranks. He was found, without his head." The laughter died instantly. Zalvarin's expression turned cold. "Draxar was one of our finest," she said softly. Her claws tapped against her throne in thought. "And you expect me to believe that a single human, a species barely beyond its primitive roots, is capable of such feats?" Korak swallowed hard. "I did not believe it either, Your Majesty, until I saw him myself." The queen's curiosity. Silence filled the chamber. Zalvarin studied the general, searching for any sign of deception. But Korak had served her for decades. He was not a man who feared shadows. Finally, she stood. "I will see this ghost for myself," she declared. The other warlords stirred in shock. "Majesty, you need not." "I will," she interrupted. "Send our best hunters. I want him captured alive." She paused, her lips curling into a smirk. "If this human is truly a legend, then I wish to see how legends die." Korak bowed. "As you command." Far away, in the shadows, beyond the throne room, beyond the walls of the Drakthul war camp, Daniel Cade crouched in the ruins of a fallen city. He watched the alien soldiers from the shadows, his knife resting against his palm. "They're getting nervous," he murmured to himself, a smirk forming. "Let them come. Let them hunt." They had no idea who they were dealing with. The Drakthul warriors moved like shadows through the ruined city, their weapons ready. Their queen had given an order: find the human and capture him alive. But none of them felt confident. The stories had spread. Whispers of a ghost, a warrior that could not be seen, could not be caught. He had already taken down some of their best soldiers. Still, they were hunters, and no prey had ever escaped the Drakthul. They thought tonight would be no different. They were wrong. A trap in the dark. Daniel Cade watched from above, hidden in the wreckage of a crumbling building. The aliens moved below him, scanning every shadow, their golden eyes glowing in the dark. They were fast, strong, armed with advanced weapons, but they did not know the land like he did. Daniel had spent weeks turning this city into his hunting ground. He had memorized every collapsed tunnel, every unstable rooftop, every hidden path. And now he was ready to strike. He moved silently across the beams, stepping only where he knew the metal would not creak. Below, the Drakthul spread out. A mistake. Daniel pulled a small detonator from his belt. He pressed the button. Boom! A controlled explosion shook the ground, sending fire and smoke into the air. The aliens shouted in their own language, confused and disoriented. Dust clouded their vision. That was all the opening Daniel needed. The ghost strikes. A Drakthul warrior turned, trying to regain his bearings. He never saw the human drop from above. Daniel's knife flashed. One clean cut to the throat. The warrior collapsed before he could even make a sound. The others turned too late. Daniel was already gone. Panic spread through the squad. "Where is he?" one of them hissed. Silence. Then, a sharp whistle echoed from the ruins, a sound humans used to signal one another in battle. The Drakthul warriors raised their weapons, scanning the darkness. Another whistle, from a different direction. Then another. "He's not alone," one of them growled. But he was. Daniel was just playing mind games. A message for the queen. By the time the smoke cleared, 5 Drakthul lay dead. The others fled back to their camp, terrified. And when they returned to Queen Zalverin, they'd brought a warning. One of their fallen warriors had been left at the entrance of their fortress, a message carved into his armor. "Come find me, Your Majesty." Zalverin read the words, her golden eyes narrowing. For the first time in centuries, she felt something unexpected. Excitement. Queen Zalverin stood at the entrance of her war camp, staring at the message carved into her fallen warrior's armor. "Come find me, Your Majesty." Her soldiers stood in silence, waiting for her reaction. Some expected her to be furious. Others thought she would see this as an insult. Instead, she smiled. "This human," she murmured, running her clawed fingers over the carved words. "He is either very brave or very foolish." She turned to General Korak, her most trusted warlord. "Prepare my weapons. I will hunt him myself." The general hesitated. "Your Majesty, it is beneath you to." Her eyes flashed. "Do not question me." Korak immediately lowered his head. "As you command." The queen was done waiting. The hunter becomes the prey. Hours later, Zalverin moved through the ruins of the fallen city, her elite guards following behind. She did not wear her royal robes. Instead, she was dressed in light combat armor, her twin energy blades strapped to her back. Her golden eyes scanned the darkness, searching, listening. The city was too quiet. "He's here," she whispered. Her soldiers nodded, tightening their grips on their weapons. They moved carefully, checking every shadow, every broken building. Nothing. Then, a sharp click. A trap. Boom! An explosion erupted behind them, sending fire and smoke into the air. The queen turned, her blades drawn, but no attack followed. "He's testing us," she murmured. She smiled again. "Good. A deadly dance." Suddenly, a shadow moved. The queen spun, her blades slicing through the air. Kelang. A knife met her weapon, blocking the strike. For the first time, she saw him. Daniel Cade. His face was hidden under a worn-out combat helmet, his armor scratched and battle-scarred. He moved like liquid, fast and controlled. No wasted energy, no hesitation. He leaped back before she could strike again, vanishing into the ruins. After him, one of her guards roared. "No," Zalverin ordered, holding up a hand. She tilted her head, watching the shadows. "He wants us to chase him, but this city is his hunting ground. If we run in blind, we die." Her voice dropped into a whisper. "He is waiting." A dangerous game. Daniel crouched in the wreckage of a broken tower, watching them through his visor. For the first time, he felt something unexpected. Respect. This queen was different. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a warrior. He smirked. "All right, Your Majesty. Let's see if you can keep up." And with that, the game truly began. The ruins of the old city were quiet again, too quiet. Queen Zalverin stood still, her golden eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. She knew the human was close. She could feel it. "He's playing with us," she murmured, her voice low and dangerous. "And he's good at it." Her elite soldiers moved carefully around her, their weapons ready. They were silent, but even their presence seemed too loud in the stillness of the ruins. They all knew that the moment they rushed in blindly, they would be caught off guard. Zalveren kept her eyes on the horizon, waiting. She wasn't the type to be easily outsmarted, but this human had already shown that he was no ordinary enemy. The ghost's trick. Daniel Cade was watching them, hidden behind the broken walls of a building. He saw the Drakthul soldiers carefully searching the area, but they weren't prepared for his next move. He had no intention of being caught. Not yet. His hand moved to a small device on his belt, a piece of human tech designed to distract. He activated it, and within moments, a loud whistling noise filled the air, something far away, but close enough to make the Drakthul think it was a signal. One of the soldiers turned toward the sound, signaling the others to follow. That was his chance. Daniel moved fast, slinking through the shadows, his body low to the ground. He knew exactly where he was going. He'd been preparing for this moment since the moment the Queen had ordered the hunt. Zalveren's focus. Zalveren heard the noise, but her focus remained sharp. The human was trying to lead them into another trap. She could feel it. Stay close, she ordered her soldiers, her voice calm and steady. Do not follow the noise. Watch the rooftops. Her mind raced. This human didn't just fight. He fought. He planned. It was as if he knew the Drakthul tactics better than some of her own warriors. She hated it. She had never been tested like this before. But she wasn't about to lose. She had already fought wars with the greatest strategists in the galaxy. If this human thought he could outsmart her, he was in for a rude awakening. The trap is set, Daniel, watching from a different spot, grinned when he saw the Drakthul following the false trail. He moved again, slipping into the shadows. The real trap was set, but he couldn't afford to rush it. He had to keep moving, keep the Queen's attention focused elsewhere. Every time they thought they were getting close, he would vanish. He was the ghost, after all. But as he crouched in the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity, he heard a sound that made his heart race. The sound of Zalveren's boots. She was coming closer. He cursed under his breath. She wasn't falling for his tricks anymore. She had learned. She was close. A deadly encounter. Zalveren's sharp eyes caught movement in the distance. She raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to stop. Her gaze fixed on a shadow moving across the broken landscape. There he was. Daniel Cade. This time, he wouldn't be able to run. The Queen moved swiftly, her energy blades drawn. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It was time to finish this. Daniel Cade had never felt so alive. The thrill of being hunted, the rush of his blood pounding in his veins. It was a game to him now. And in this ancient city, with its broken towers and crumbling streets, he was the predator, and they were the prey. But the Drakthul Queen was different. She was too good. The Queen's approach. Zalveren moved with precision, her golden eyes fixed on the shadow she had spotted. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't chasing blindly, firing at every corner. She thought ahead. Her movements were measured, silent. She was closing in. She could feel it. He was here. She was certain now. The human couldn't keep running forever. The battlefield had shifted. She was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter. Daniel's escape. Daniel crouched behind a shattered wall, listening carefully. His heartbeat was louder than ever in his ears, and the noise of the Drakthul searching the streets was almost deafening. But he wasn't going to let them corner him. Not yet. He had to make them believe he was gone. He set a series of small distraction devices in place, each one designed to make the Drakthul think he had gone down one path, only to find out he was already long gone. It was a gamble, but it was the only option left. He moved again, but this time he wasn't running. He was waiting. The Queen's patience. Zalveren stopped in her tracks, watching as the shadows shifted around her. For a moment, it seemed like the human had disappeared entirely, but she didn't fall for it. She knew this trick. Her mind raced. The human wasn't just running away. He was trying to lure her in. She stepped forward, slowly, silently, keeping her energy blades at the ready. She wasn't afraid. She had faced enemies far stronger than him. She would not be deceived. The moment of truth. A sharp sound echoed through the ruins. A small explosion, but it wasn't the usual distraction. The air seemed to ripple as if something in the distance had triggered a greater force. Zalvaran's eyes narrowed. It was a trap. But it wasn't meant for her. It was meant for the soldiers. The Queen's elite guards were at the wrong point in the ruins. Daniel had divided them. As the Drakthul warriors moved toward the explosion, Zalvaran knew she was alone with him. A clash of wills. Daniel's heart raced as he heard the Queen's boots echo closer. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. He turned, slowly, and there she was, Zalvaran, standing at the end of the ruined street, her golden eyes locking onto his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They both knew what was coming. Daniel reached for the knife at his side. It was nothing compared to her energy blades, but it had been enough so far. Zalvaran's lips curled into a smile, but there was no amusement in it. "You have been a worthy annoyance, human," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "But this is where your legend ends. The final battle." Daniel's grin widened. He was ready. He didn't care if he was facing one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He had already shown her what humans were capable of. But what came next was unlike any battle either of them had faced. No words, no traps. Just two warriors standing across from each other in a ruined city, both knowing that only one would walk away. The ruined city was silent, save for the faint crackling of flames in the distance. Zalvaran and Daniel Cave stood at opposite ends of a shattered street, facing each other, eyes locked with unshakable focus. There was no more hesitation, no more tricks. It was just the two of them now, ready for a fight to the death. Zalvaran moved first, her energy blades flashing to life with a hum. The air seemed to tremble as she stepped forward, her movements smooth and confident. She was a warrior queen, battle-hardened and experienced. Her blades, forged from the finest alien metal, were capable of slicing through the toughest armor with ease. Daniel didn't flinch. He had seen her weapons, knew their power. But he had something she didn't: speed. He gripped his knife tighter, watching her every movement, waiting for his chance. Without warning, Zalvaran charged, moving with a speed that was almost too fast for Daniel to follow. The first slash of her blade came at him like a streak of lightning. He dodged, barely avoiding the deadly edge, but the force of her swing sent a shockwave through the ground beneath them. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He countered, slashing with his knife, aiming for her side. But Zalvaran was already pulling back, her other blade meeting his strike in a clash of steel against steel. She smiled. "You are faster than most, human. But speed alone will not save you." The dance of steel and flesh. The fight was more than just a battle of strength. It was a dance, the Queen's grace and power against Daniel's agility and wit. Each time Zalvaran attacked, Daniel was forced to retreat, narrowly avoiding her strikes. She was relentless, each move carefully calculated. But Daniel, despite being pushed back, kept his composure, waiting for the right moment. He could feel the ground beneath his feet shifting. The city was unstable. He needed to use that to his advantage. As Zalvaran launched another strike, Daniel rolled backward, narrowly avoiding her blades. His back hit the crumbling wall of a building. But he didn't stop. In one fluid motion, he vaulted upward, using the wreckage to propel himself higher, landing on a narrow ledge above her. Zalvaran's eyes flicked up, surprised by his quick thinking. "Impressive," she said, stepping back to prepare for his next move. The human's strategy. Daniel knew this wouldn't be a simple fight of strength. The Queen was stronger, faster, and more skilled than any human he had ever faced. But he had one advantage: his ability to think on his feet, to adapt. He had watched her carefully, studied her movements, and now he had a plan. He wasn't going to win by brute force. He was going to outsmart her. He leaped down, spinning through the air and landing just behind her. Zalverin barely had time to turn before he slashed at her shoulder. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The blade made contact with her armor, but instead of cutting through it as Daniel expected, the armor deflected the strike. Zalverin's quick reflexes spared her from a fatal blow. She grinned. "You think you can defeat me with mere tricks, human," she taunted, her voice full of confidence. The Queen's fury. Her eyes blazed with fury as she unleashed a barrage of strikes, faster and more powerful than before. Daniel was forced to dodge and weave, his movements fluid and precise. But even his speed couldn't keep him ahead for long. Zalverin's attacks came in a relentless flurry, each one more deadly than the last. Finally, one of her blades caught his arm, a sharp slice that sent a jolt of pain through his body. Daniel staggered back, his grip on his knife faltering. His vision blurred for a moment, but he refused to fall. He couldn't. Not now. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. This fight wasn't over yet. The city was no longer just a battleground. It had become a place of survival. Daniel Cade fought on with everything he had, but Queen Zalverin was relentless. Every time he tried to recover from her strikes, she was already on top of him, pushing him back with her superior strength and skill. His body ached. His breath was ragged, his vision blurring from the pain. He had been cut, bruised, and barely able to keep up with her. Yet, despite it all, Daniel refused to give in. He couldn't. Zalverin saw the human stagger, saw the blood dripping from his arm. She didn't show mercy. This was a battle to the death, and she intended to win. She moved in for another strike, her blades flashing in the air. But Daniel was faster than she expected. In the moment before her blade could strike him, Daniel dropped to the ground, rolling just out of her reach. The sharp pain in his side nearly took him out, but his instincts kicked in. He pushed himself back onto his feet, eyes locked on the Queen. She paused for a moment, watching him carefully. His resolve was unwavering, despite the overwhelming odds. Zalverin had faced the greatest warriors in the galaxy, but there was something different about this human. There was something in his eyes. Determination, defiance. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting because he believed in something greater than himself. The moment of reckoning. Daniel stumbled backward, his legs growing weaker with each step. He couldn't keep this up much longer. He was bleeding, exhausted, and every part of his body screamed for rest. But then, his eyes caught something, a weakness in the Queen's stance. It was a split-second opening. In that moment, Daniel realized something. This wasn't just about surviving. This wasn't just about winning. This was about proving to the Queen, to the entire galaxy, that humanity could never be underestimated. He gritted his teeth and made his move. The final strike. Zalverin, sensing his desperation, raised her blades for a final devastating attack. But Daniel wasn't there. He was already in motion, darting beneath her reach, his body moving with a speed that surprised even him. He wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to show her what humans were capable of. His knife, now stained with the blood of his enemies, flashed in the moonlight. In one swift motion, Daniel struck, aiming for the exposed joint in Zalverin's armor. The blade met her armor. But this time, something was different. The metal bent, not from the force of the strike, but from the human's determination. Zalverin gasped as she felt the blade scrape against her skin, a deep gash appearing along her shoulder. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was enough to shatter her focus. The Queen's doubt. Zalverin stepped back, her golden eyes flashing with surprise and something else. Uncertainty. For the first time in the battle, she felt the sting of defeat. She had been so sure of her victory, so certain that no human could ever stand against her. And yet, here was Daniel Cade, a mere human, bleeding, battered, but still standing. He hadn't given up. Not once. And in that moment, Zalverin realized something she had never expected to feel. Respect. She lowered her blade slightly, her expression hardening. "You're more than just a legend, human," she said, her voice laced with admiration. "You're a warrior." The unlikely truth. Daniel took a slow step forward, wiping the sweat and blood from his brow. His body screamed for rest, but his eyes stayed fixed on the queen. He had given everything in this fight, every ounce of his strength, his courage, his very will to survive. And for the first time, Zalverin had seen it. He wasn't just some human. He was a warrior. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The battle had come to a standstill. The ruins of the old city, once filled with noise and violence, were now silent. Daniel Cade and Zalverin stood facing each other, both bloodied and bruised, but still standing tall. Their weapons were lowered, but the tension in the air was thick. Zalverin's golden eyes glowed in the dim light of the ruins. She had been the one to pursue, to hunt, to conquer. She had fought in wars across the galaxy, facing the strongest and most fearsome enemies. But none had ever made her feel this way. None had made her doubt. For the first time, she was unsure of herself. Could a human really be this strong? Daniel stood firm, breathing heavily, but his eyes never left hers. He had been wounded, but the fire in his spirit had not been extinguished. He had proven his point. Humans were not weak. They were not to be underestimated. Zalverin broke the silence first. "You fought well, human. I did not expect you to last this long." Daniel didn't respond right away. He was still catching his breath, his body sore from the intense battle. But he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had faced a queen, one of the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and lived to tell the tale. After a moment, he spoke. "I told you. You were wrong about us." Zalverin nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "You humans are not like any other species we have encountered. You are different." Her voice was measured, but there was a hint of respect in it now. Daniel could hear it, even if she wasn't ready to fully admit it yet. The human's resolve. Daniel took a step forward, his movements slower now, but still purposeful. He couldn't afford to give up now. He couldn't let his guard down. He had fought too hard for this moment. "The galaxy doesn't know it yet, but one day they'll understand," he said quietly. "Humanity isn't just a race of survivors. We fight for what we believe in. We fight for freedom. And for each other." Zalverin studied him, her gaze cold but thoughtful. She could see the truth in his words. She had fought countless battles, had seen species fall at her feet, but she had never seen anything like human resilience. "Perhaps," she said after a long pause, "perhaps there is more to your kind than I realized." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what will you do about it?" Zalverin's lips curled into a small smile. "What would you have me do?" A new understanding. Daniel's gaze softened. This wasn't just about victory anymore. It wasn't just about proving something. He had shown her that humans were not weak, and in return, she had shown him something he didn't expect: respect. He didn't have an answer to her question, not at first. He was too tired, too worn from the battle to think clearly. But when he looked at her, at this alien queen who had hunted him across the city, he saw something in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was understanding. "You could change things," Daniel said quietly. "You could help us, help humanity. Instead of seeing us as an enemy, you cooled." Zalverin cut him off, her voice softer than he expected. "I have never fought for peace, human. I am a conqueror. It is what I know." "I know," he replied. "But sometimes, it's the ones who fight the hardest that end up realizing peace is worth more than power." A new path. Zalverin stood still, contemplating his words. The war had taken so much from her, her home, her people. She had learned to trust no one, to conquer and destroy. But this human, standing before her, had changed something inside her. For the first time, she was starting to question her own path. Was it possible? Could she truly change? A small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Zalveran took a deep breath. I will consider your words, human. Perhaps. There is more to this galaxy than just conquest. Daniel nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. I think you're starting to see that now. The two warriors stood in the silence of the ruined city, a new understanding between them. A new chapter had begun, not just for them, but for humanity and the galaxy. And as they stood there, neither of them knew what the future would hold, but they were ready to face it, together. The city lay in ruins, but the battlefield was over. The once destructive clash between Queen Zalveran and Daniel Cade had transformed into something neither of them had expected. A conversation, a shift in perspective. Zalveran stood tall, her golden eyes now calm, no longer focused on conquest or domination. She had been a warrior all her life, leading her people to victory after victory. But today, for the first time, she saw the world from a different angle, a human's angle. And it changed everything. Daniel watched her closely, still wary but not as tense. The fight had ended, but there was still uncertainty. He didn't know what would happen next, but he did know one thing. He had proved a point, an unexpected offer. After a long silence, Zalveran spoke, her voice firm but thoughtful. You are right, human. I have spent my life conquering, destroying, ruling with an iron fist. I believed that power was the only way to lead. She turned to face him fully. But you've shown me that there's another way, a way of understanding, of cooperation. Perhaps it is time for the Dominion to change. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Change? You mean stop conquering? Zalveran's lips twitched into a small smile. Not just stop, but learn to coexist with those we once saw as enemies. Perhaps for the first time, we can lead with respect instead of fear. Daniel was stunned. This wasn't the queen he had imagined. He had thought she would never change, never listen. But here she was, admitting that maybe there was a different path, a path he had believed in all along. He nodded slowly. That's a big change. A lot of people won't like it. I am used to that, Zalveran replied. But for the first time, I believe it's worth trying. A human's influence. Daniel looked around at the city, the destruction still evident in the cracked buildings and scorched earth. He could see that Zalveran had been the force that led to this. But now she was considering something new. She was seeing what Daniel had known for so long. That peace, however difficult, was worth fighting for. You're not just a conqueror, are you? Daniel said quietly, his voice full of admiration. You could be more. Zalveran's eyes flickered. What do you mean? You're a leader. You don't have to destroy everything to lead. You can build something instead. She regarded him with a curious expression. You speak of building, but the world you live in is full of conflict. You know this better than anyone. The humans are not perfect. I know, Daniel replied, but we're trying. And sometimes that's enough. Zalveran studied him, her expression softening. Perhaps there is hope for your kind after all. A new partnership. Daniel stepped forward, his posture relaxed now. You said something about cooperation. If you're serious about that, maybe we can start with a smaller step. You don't have to change everything at once, but it's a start. Zalveran paused, clearly thinking. A smaller step. Yeah. Let's start by talking. Work with us. Help us rebuild the colonies you've destroyed. Help us show the galaxy that humans are more than just legends or pests. Zalveran's gaze was intense. You would have me help your people. I would, Daniel said simply. You might be a conqueror, but you're more than that. You're a leader. You can make a real difference. Zalveran was silent for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. I will help you, human. I will help you rebuild. The path forward. The two of them stood there for a while, the weight of what had just been agreed upon sinking in. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but they both understood something important now. The universe was not built on the destruction of others. It was built on understanding, compromise, and the willingness to adapt. And as the sun began to set over the ruined city, a new chapter began, not just for the humans, but for the galaxy as a whole. Daniel turned to Zalverin with a small, tired smile. "So, where do we start?" She met his gaze with a faint smile of her own. "We start by listening." The ruins of the city still smoldered, the echoes of battle fading as the sun set on a new day. Daniel Cade and Zalverin stood side by side, looking at the broken landscape before them. It was a city of destruction, but for them, it was also a city of possibilities. Zalverin turned her gaze toward Daniel, her golden eyes still sharp but softened by the conversation they had shared. She had spent her life conquering, ruling with fear, and taking what she wanted. But now she was standing at the crossroads of something completely different. "Do you think it will work?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "I mean, will the rest of your people listen?" Zalverin glanced at the ruins around them. "It will not be easy. Change never is. But it is necessary." She turned to face him. "I will need time to convince my generals, my people. Many will resist, but the seeds of doubt have been planted. They will listen eventually." Daniel nodded, understanding her struggle. He had seen the same resistance in his own people when they faced overwhelming odds. But sometimes, all it took was one person to make a stand, to start the conversation. "You've already made a step," Daniel said. "By agreeing to this, you've already proven that you're not the same queen I was fighting against." Zalverin gave a small smile. "I suppose that is true." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Perhaps I have underestimated humans. And not just you. Your kind is far more than what I thought. There is strength in compassion, in unity. Building bridges." The following days were filled with challenges. Zalverin sent envoys to her warlords, her generals, and her people, speaking of the new path she intended to take. Some were furious, some were curious, and others remained silent, unsure of how to react. But Daniel never left her side. He helped her navigate this new journey, helping her communicate with the humans who had once been her enemies. He showed her the strength of human resilience, of people who would rebuild what had been broken, who would help heal the wounds caused by war. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Not everyone agreed with Zalverin's decision, and some still viewed humans as a threat. But as the days passed, the idea of peace began to take root. They started to work together, humans and Drakthal, in ways that neither side had thought possible before. Zalverin began to see things differently. The world wasn't just about domination and victory. There were other ways to lead, other ways to conquer. She could be a ruler of peace, a ruler of change. It would take time, but she was willing to try. A shared future. One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Zalverin and Daniel stood on a high balcony, looking down at the city. It was quieter now, not yet fully rebuilt, but there were signs of progress. The ruins were starting to be cleared. The people were beginning to work together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Daniel glanced over at her. "You've done it. You've started a revolution." Zalverin looked at him, her eyes soft. "We've done it. Together. But it's just the beginning." He smiled. "It always is." For the first time, the queen didn't look like a conqueror. She looked like a leader, someone who had found a new purpose, someone who was ready to build a better future. The stars shone brightly above them, and for the first time in a long while, there was hope. And in that hope, there was a promise that the universe could change, that even the most unlikely partnerships could create a brighter tomorrow.